Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-48 or 2489, extension 2425. I would like to ask the committee if there's any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none, and I want to acknowledge that Councillor Turner did send his regrets. Moving on then through the agenda to the consent items. I have not been asked by anyone to pull anything, and I see no requests. If I can go to Councillor Helmer.
I'll move the consent items, and just a brief comment on 2.4. This came before committee briefly earlier and had a chance between the last time we discussed it and now to meet with the Heritage Planning staff to talk about it in a bit more depth, and certainly I support the direction we're going on this front.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually had a couple questions about the priority levels for the register. It seemed that the system we had might have been valuable in as much as might have made it easier to make those decisions, and certainly people hoping to invest in properties and develop them. If they were hoping to tear something down, they might have chosen something. They might be more attracted to a level 3 priority than a level 1. It seems that this may make those decisions more difficult and just have the entire process be more complicated, lengthy, and costly. So I would just have that question through you to staff. How is this moving us in a better direction?
To Mr. Gagnon.
Thank you and good afternoon. Just in response to those comments that were raised by the councillor, I would hope that if a property owner was seeking to redevelop a property, they would first be looking for properties that aren't included on the register, our inventory of heritage resources, as there might be no potential obstacles to the demolitions of buildings on those properties. What we found in an examination of the priority levels that were assigned is there isn't always a rigorous evaluation process to assign those priority levels. So a property that may have a priority 3 ranking when an evaluation is completed could be quite significant from a cultural heritage perspective, when applying that priority 3 ranking might not be appropriate. So I think that it could potentially be the inverse reaction, where low priority could result in a very significant property and then cause even more confusion for a property owner. What staff are recommending is that the priority levels be removed and that it be more clearly reaffirmed that all the properties included on the register, our inventory of heritage resources, require evaluation to determine their cultural heritage value. At this point, all properties included on the register are believed to have cultural heritage value. An evaluation would confirm that suspicion.
Okay, thank you. And it seems to me that if I may, Madam Chair, the ultimate place for us to get is to figure out the properties that we want to designate them, and the ones that we don't have an interest in designating or are sure don't have cultural heritage value. They're obviously off the list, and so we know what's what. How can we get to that place?
Thank you, and through the chair, our recognition of our cultural heritage resources in London is an ongoing process. Things like mid-century modern properties are things that are gaining recognition within our community as being of cultural heritage value. It's not something that will ever be done, I don't believe, but something that reflects an ongoing, continuous learning and understanding of what's significant to our community and retaining those resources for future generations. That being said, we do have a process to consider the removal of of properties from the register through the demolition request process. That's articulated in the council policy manual, where we applied the regulation 906 criteria to determine if a property is or is not significant from a cultural heritage perspective. If a property doesn't meet the criteria, it can be removed from the register and remove its listing completely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answers, and Councillor Helmer, or I should say Deputy Mayor Helmer, I'm sorry if you had to hear those a second time.
Thank you. If I may, too, I would just like to make a comment on 2.2, which is bird-friendly development, if the committee will allow me to just speak from the chair. And I just want to more or less remind the committee that we are directing to circulate an attached draft bylaw for bird-friendly development, and in particular going through the site plan process. And I want to acknowledge the work that staff and that EPAC did. I know EPAC brought forward the draft recommendations a while ago, but I think this is something that really supports the London plan, and it's supporting how we protect I guess the migration of birds for 4 stories or more when it comes to buildings as it goes through that site plan process. And it will be going through a circulation and will eventually be coming back to council for its endorsement. So I just want to again emphasize there are some challenges, especially when it comes to that zero, having the light in some of the large buildings. But when we do put lights out, we are directing that light to come down. And so there's some minor adjustments that we'll be making as we're moving forward. So again, thanks to EPAC and to staff. And also, if this is brought forward, there will be information going to the ecologist and to EPAC, as well as the London Animal Welfare Advisory Groups too for further comment. So I just wanted to mention that. And with that, I'd like to put all the consent items up. Oh, I need a seconder, sorry. Councillor Cassidy, and the motion was moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And moving on to the scheduled items, we go to 3.1, and this is a delegation from a delegation request from Mainline Planning Services regarding 6188 Colonel Talbot Road. And if you would like to come forward with your delegation request. Okay. And if you can come forward and state your name and address, and just to remind you, you do have 5 minutes. I think you might need your microphone there.
My name is Joseph Platino, 100 Cold Spring Road, Clanburg, Ontario. I am a registered professional planner. I represent the owner of an 18-hectare parcel of land at municipal address 6188 Colonel Talbot. I submitted 3 applications to the city with respect to this property, and for the benefit of new councillors, just want to go over it. In 2015, a variance was approved to allow the use of the property for farming of mushrooms. By 2016, the city approved a site plan and building permits that allowed our tenant Shogun to construct a multi-million-dollar hydroponic farm building designed to grow maitake mushrooms indoors. By 2017, Shogun approached the owner and declared that the first phase of the project is a tremendous success, but in order to remain viable and financially responsible to investors, they needed to expand their farm operation. However, financing is contingent on property ownership. On this basis, we applied to amend the bylaw to recognize a concurrent application to create a parcel of land that would be conveyed to Shogun. The current zoning permits the creation of the lot to be conveyed to Shogun, but excluded the requested change to the minimum lot area for the remnant lot. As you are aware, Section 4513 of the Planning Act will not permit a variance to the parent bylaw until November 2019. We are here to request your exception pursuant to Section 4514 to allow to allow our application for a variance so that we can request relief from the Committee of Adjustment by recognizing that there is a reduction in lot area for the retained parcel following the creation of the lot to be conveyed to Shogun, which is permitted by the enforced bylaw. So our request today is simply that council pass a resolution to allow us to submit an application and get that process going. I just have an additional word from the owner's representative as well.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Council, members of the Planning Committee, Joe Fontana, VP of for Business and Government Affairs at Shogun. I'm here with Mr. Odera and Mrs. Sakamoto in the audience. I want to thank the previous council for essentially doing, with the help of administration, for giving us what we needed. Unfortunately, the unintended consequence was we can't get a severance until you deal with Joe's parcel, which, as you know, we've been here for 2 years. I'm just here to tell you that unless we get, or his request, that we go for a minor variance, that he's able to make an application, it's caused us nothing but grief. We are very, very successful. We want to expand, but unfortunately we need a severance and therefore ownership of our 10-acre parcel with a building where in fact we can expand and grow. And if we can't, then that is going to cause us, and I think the City of London, some issues. So I'm here to support Mr. Plotino's request that the application be heard by the Consent Authority for a minor variance. I think at the end of the day, there's a resolution here to be had so that we can both go ahead and do it. Now, again, I want to thank the previous council and some of the committee members here that in fact gave us what we wanted, but unfortunately, it's tied to what he needs to do, and unless he can do what he does, then we can't do anything else. And so I would respectfully request that you grant his application, or at least his appeal, to be able to make application. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to go to the committee if there's any questions or comments. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have separately a report from staff. Are we going to get into questions from them? Are they going to give a presentation about the report that's before us in the same manner?
So I'd like to go to staff.
Through the chair, so you're correct, we do have a report that we prepared in response to the delegation request. It provides factual information for you on the request itself, previous applications, the policy framework that would be applicable. Staff, though, are not able to provide you with planning opinions on these matters. We don't actually have an application that's before you, so it's a decision of committee and council as to whether or not they want to entertain the request or basically whether they want to retain decision-making authority for the zoning matter going forward. With that, however, we are able to answer technical questions if you do have them.
Are there any technical questions the committee may have? If the committee allows me to ask a question here from the chair, I'm just trying to remember where we left off. And from what I understand is that we did allow the severance to take place if there are two parcels would be joined together. I'm not sure, well, does that still remain?
Through you, Madam Chair, the previous zoning bylaw amendment that was approved, what it in essence did was it recognized the reduced lot area and lot frontage for the retained parcel, the parcel with the mushroom farm operation. So it recognized the frontage and the 4-hectare parcel for that size. For the conveyed parcel, it just recognized the frontage but not the area requirement. So as a condition of the consent was approved with conditions that the applicant demonstrate that they can satisfy the zoning bylaw or achieve another Planning Act approval in order to comply or show compliance with the bylaw. So in essence, what that means is that the parcel, the retained parcel, would either have to be conveyed to and combined with an adjacent property, or come back for another Planning Act application, like a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance application.
So that can still happen. Does a minor variance need to, do we need, the applicant is asking for a minor variance. What is the difference then? What is going to be different?
Well, the options, the Planning Act options are, number one, combine the property with the conveyed property with an adjoining parcel to achieve compliance with the zoning bylaw. That does not require any further Planning Act approval. The other option is rezone the parcel to recognize the reduced lot area of the bylaw. In this case, the applicant is suggesting a minor variance application as another Planning Act tool. The difference being that the Committee of Adjustment, a minor variance would become a decision of the Committee of Adjustment, and there's various tests that need to be satisfied in order to grant approval or for staff approval, whereas a rezoning would be a decision of council.
And if I can just follow up, if we allow the minor variance, we as a council are giving up, I guess, our decision-making on this parcel of land. And it,
Through the chair, so the matter would then be considered by the Committee of Adjustment, which has delegated authority for these matters. I just do want to clarify that this is a new request. The zoning provisions that were adopted through the zoning were deliberate and specific, so it's not an unintended consequence. It's not an error. This is a specific request for a different action to be taken.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. So I think I have a question for the applicant. My expectation after we dealt with this matter before was that there was going to very likely be a merger of lands. The fellow who is here, I think, who owns most of the property we're talking about, he described that he owned a whole bunch of land in this area. So what happened to the idea of merging this parcel with some other adjacent parcel?
The simple answer is that Mr. Lane was custodian for several companies that owned individual parcels in the area. But this company that owns the owner of this property does not own any adjacent lands. So, I mean, we expressed our opinion at the time. We understood that there were two options before council. One was for the approval of the severance, and the second was for the refusal, which required the amalgamation of property through a condition at the committee, at the consent authority level. My understanding was that the application was approved, and in fact, the application allows for the creation of the land to be conveyed, which is not what I just heard from staff. Can we get this turned on? under purpose and effect, in the notice, it says very clearly, the purpose and effect of the requested bylaw amendment is to facilitate the severance of a 4.04 hectare portion of the subject property to allow the sale of land containing a hydroponic mushroom farm separate from other portions of the property. That was in fact done. So we do have a lot reduction for that property, which was always the intent of the owner to convey. The retained lot is a larger portion that is residual, which is 14 hectares. So I don't understand. I mean, when we saw that we had an approval, we simply understood that by creating the parcel to be conveyed, which is a severed parcel, that the retained parcel would obviously be the difference. Now, we understand as a consequence that amalgamation of the retained parcel, which is the 14 hectares, not the parcel that they just referred to, is possible to conform to the existing bylaw. However, without a willing purchaser, it's impossible to attain the severance, which is not what I believe council approved. They approved a remedy that would allow the creation of the lot. So if we move back to the condition that the provisional consent was granted on, that condition simply states that the new parcels, both the retained and the conveyed piece, must conform to zoning. And that's where we're at. Staff also informed correctly in their report that the matter is before the OMB. And they've indicated that a hearing date was not scheduled, but one was, in fact, scheduled for November of 2018. When it came to my attention through our solicitor that the remedy is there through variance to allow the consent, therefore the consent is not untenable. We submitted an application, and in order to defer our hearing, we needed the consent of the municipality as well through their solicitor, which was granted. So rather than go through an OMB hearing, which would be costly, we felt that it was appropriate to come back here and request that our application be allowed. And that's where we're at.
Thank you. Mr. Tomazinik.
Madam Chair, I think it's appropriate for me to wade in a little bit just because it was my group that was responsible for the zoning bylaw amendment. I respectfully disagree that council approved the application as requested, and I'm reading from the resolution here. Council knew exactly what they were doing because the resolution states that after approving the zone to create the lots, it would have the, and I'm quoting now, have the effect of permitting a severed parcel with a minimum lot area of 4 hectares and a lot frontage of 100 meters, and a retained parcel with a minimum lot frontage of 36 meters to be created through a future consent application. It being noted that as a condition of the future consent application, the retained parcel with a lot area of 14.29 hectares and a lot frontage of 36.3 hectares will be required to be merged with adjacent lands to form a consolidated parcel with an area of 40 hectares or greater. That was done. What hadn't been done, though, was the merger of the two properties.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. And so that's been helpful, I think, just to remind everybody what was dealt with last time. And to be very clear, if this were to proceed to Committee of Adjustment, the relief that is being sought is that we'd like the lot area to be 14 hectares instead of 40. Yeah. So the question is, do we really think that's minor and appropriate to go to the Committee of Adjustment or not?
Any other comments from the committee? So if I just may again speak from the chair, I personally think that that is not minor. And I think there is an opportunity for the applicant that I understand still. Yes. Mr. Yeoman.
Through you, Madam Chair, my apologies, I don't mean to interject. I just want to caution the committee, I think we're starting to wade into some murky water about the merits of an application rather than procedural matter, which is before you right now, which is whether or not council wishes to see this being received by the Committee of Adjustment, where there will be planning recommendations associated with that and analysis before that, or whether they think it should be a subsequent process before this committee and council.
Councillor Squire.
Just so I understand, first of all, just so everyone knows, the presentations, maybe it's clear to someone else, but I found this whole exercise that I've just gone through very confusing, very difficult to follow, very difficult to understand, which you can take that any way you want, but it wasn't presented in a manner that I'm able to follow what's going on. That being aside, we're not deciding whether it's a minor variance or not. Am I right that what the applicant's saying is we would like to go there and see if it gets granted as a minor variance? So I have a difficulty with us making an adjudication here on what's a minor variance or not, because that certainly isn't our job. But if they go to the Committee of Adjustments, I'm assuming the committee, there will be staff there saying, this is not a minor variance, you shouldn't grant it. So it doesn't cause me a huge problem to say, let's take it to the Committee of Adjustments, because they're going to have to adjudicate on this within their jurisdiction. So I think it's a good point to say this may not be a minor variance, but I don't want to get into that because I'd rather have the Committee of Adjustments adjudicate that, and the applicant may not be successful.
If I may ask another question here from the chair, can the applicant go to the Committee of Adjustments and ask for a minor variance?
So through the chair, on page 55, we were trying to be fairly clean and concise. Basically, there's a 2-year moratorium since the adoption of the bylaw. So that's why they're here, is because they can't go to the Committee of Adjustment because of that moratorium. That's really why they're here. So they need a resolution from you to allow them to go to the Committee of Adjustment. That's really the crux of the matter. If there wasn't that 2-year moratorium, they'd just be going to the Committee of Adjustment anyways. But in this case, they just need your permission to do that. And if you do, then we just need a resolution from you to allow them to do so. And Councillor Squire is entirely correct. That application then would be judged on its merits at the Committee of Adjustment, and planning staff, planners will be commenting on that application.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to staff for that information. I believe this might be the second time this is something like this has come before us where. And it's because of the changes to the Planning Act, correct? Yes. So we had another planning application come before us where they wanted some increased height, and council had approved rezoning of a building based on a certain height. It may have been a bonus zone. I can't remember those details, but I know we had quite a long discussion and debate about whether or not to allow that to go to the Committee of Adjustment. And I remember myself personally feeling, because there had been a public participation meeting in that case, because there had been quite extensive community discussion and debate, and because height was one of the really big factors in that particular situation, that I personally didn't support allowing that one to go to the Committee of Adjustment. I felt that it should rightfully come back to council. This one's been before us a number of times. I do take Councillor or Deputy Mayor Helmer's point about 14 hectares versus 40, and this is why I brought up the past case, because of all those extenuating factors about, you know, the public participation and what the public was expecting to see built in that area. I didn't feel like it was something that should be decided by the Committee of Adjustment. I felt like council should make a decision on that. And I'm kind of leaning the same way with this one. As much as I was very supportive of this application when it came before us the first time, I like the idea of this use of agricultural land for an agricultural purpose, and maybe it doesn't fit into what we've seen as far as for agricultural land in the past, where we required really large parcels of land to grow crops and things like this. So this was a unique and kind of innovative way of using agricultural land, which I supported. But again, because council had so much discussion and so much debate, because staff worked very hard, I believe, with the applicant to try to make this application work, I'm going to wait and see if my colleagues have any other comments to make, but I'm sort of leaning in favor of having this come back to council. And I understand that staff will, again, provide recommendation to the Committee of Adjustment, and the committee will then use that to make their decision. But at the same time, it's an unelected body that was appointed by this council. I believe because this has been back to us so many times, I think it's something that council should finish with. But again, I'll wait and see if somebody can convince me otherwise. I may go the other way.
If the committee will allow me, I'll just make a quick comment here. And I want to thank the applicant for coming forward, but I do agree that this is being a conversation with council a number of times. We've been part of the process. There is an opportunity there for the applicant to work with staff or continue having an opportunity to sever the land. And I have some concerns that we as a council should take on that responsibility and continue this process. I am very much about protecting agricultural land, the fragmentation. I have those number of concerns, and I think that should be left with council to make those decisions. And again, in the back of my mind, always afraid that we'd be setting a certain precedent here to some extent, given that I, in my ward, have a number of other applications that come forward from time to time with more or less the same conversations, same concerns, and I would not be supportive of having this go to Committee of Adjustments. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm going to move receipt of the staff report. I haven't really made up my mind about this particular one, but I'd like to at least to think about it between now and council.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cassidy. And if we can vote on receiving the delegation?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Moving on to 3.2, there's a public participation meeting on a portion of 146 Exeter Road. I need a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy? Need a seconder? Councillor Squire?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-0.
Thank you. And if I could go to staff for the presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The zoning amendment application is located at 146 Exeter Road. It is a 1.2 hectare portion of a larger parcel, which actually extends all the way from Warncliffe Road down to Exeter Road. That's generally the location there. The subject site is generally located in the southwest part of the city and has frontage on Warncliffe Road South and what will soon be the Morgan Avenue extension to the east. A draft plan of subdivision was approved for these lands early in 2017. The subject site actually encompasses all of Block 30 and a small portion of what's Block 31, and within that draft approved plan of subdivision. Through the subdivision process, the lands were actually zoned, these lands were zoned for medium density type uses such as cluster housing. The applicant Sifton Properties Limited has requested the addition of the R7 zone to the subject site. The R7 zone will permit a range of seniors accommodations such as nursing homes and continuum of care facilities, in addition to the currently permitted uses. The proposed concept plan for the site illustrates a long-term care facility that is 3 stories in height with approximately 160 beds. To implement the proposed concept, the applicant has requested a density of 45 units per hectare and a maximum height of 17 meters. The zoning bylaw calculates density for nursing homes and continuum of care facilities as 3 beds equal 1 unit. In this instance, the applicant has requested a density of 45 units per hectare, so based on the area of the site and multiplied by 3 equals a possible 163 beds overall. A height of 17 meters is also requested to allow for flexibility in the architectural design. Special provisions have also been requested for a reduced front and exterior side yard of 4.5 meters in place of 7 meters, and reduced interior and rear yard depth of 4.5 meters in place of 7.2 meters. This will provide greater flexibility for the final site and allow for urban design implementation. The design concepts shown here show elevations of a 3-story building with the primary access, which will be off of Street B, which is an internal street. It's a local street, actually. The proposed use is consistent with the provincial policy statement by encouraging a mix of residential uses within the settlement area. The lands are also within the neighborhood's place type of the London Plan, and the proposed development is in keeping with the use, intensity, and form provisions of the plan. The lands are also part of the Southwest Area Secondary Plan within the Central Longwoods residential neighborhood. They're designated medium-density residential, which permits low-rise apartments at a minimum density of 35 units per hectare and a maximum density of 75 units per hectare, and a maximum height of 4 stories. The 1999 official plan also mirrors the SWAP policies and permits the uses proposed. Overall, staff are recommending the R7 zone be added to the existing zoning for the site with a height of 17 meters and a density of 45 units per hectare. Special provisions for the site include a minimum height of 2 stories and a maximum height of 4 stories. Reduced front and exterior side yard and reduced interior and rear yard setbacks of 4.5 are also recommended to encourage and foster the improved design for the site. Staff are also recommending a special provision to clarify the frontage of the site as Warncliffe Road. Through the London Plan, the frontage for a site is to be the highest order street, in this case Warncliffe Road, which is a civic boulevard. However, in the current zoning bylaw, the frontage is considered to be the shortest lot line that abuts a street. So in order to reflect regulations which are more in keeping with the London Plan, a special provision will be added, which recognizes Warncliffe as the frontage. Additional urban design and servicing considerations will be addressed at site plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the committee? I see none. If I could go to the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Sorry, can you hear me? Good evening, Madam Chair and members of committee. I'm Lindsay Clark with Sifton Properties Limited. We'd just like to say that we concur with the recommendations that are brought forward this afternoon, excuse me, by staff, and we would just like to thank them for bringing it forward, and that's all the comments that we have. I'm not sure if you have any questions for us.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the committee? I see none. I'd like to go to the gallery and ask if there's anyone here, starting on my left, that would like to speak to this application. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Gary Brown, 59 right out 35A. It's really kind of a question here. I'm just a little unsure of this. I could have sworn our planning department recommended against the Southwest area plan originally, and we're kind of forced to do it, to be honest with you. I just, like, you know, we're talking about a company that's just clear-cut a forest out there, there's clear-cut a forest at Killaley. I don't think we should be changing the setbacks. Our rules exist for a reason. Remember, Joni very often pointed out we shouldn't be planning by plot. And we're not sure what's being built around it at this moment in time, so I think it would be very premature to make an exception for the setbacks. And here, maybe once we actually see a site plan would be a more appropriate time to be approving this. Anyhow, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the center of the gallery and ask if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. And going to my right, if there's anyone here, please go to the microphone if you'd like to speak to this application. I see none. I would like to get a motion therefore to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. If I'd like to go to the committee now, if there's any questions, comments. I see none. I need a motion, therefore, to accept the staff's recommendation. Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Squire, seconding.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Next, we have a public participation meeting on 2156 Highbury Avenue North, and I'd like to ask staff if they'd like to make the presentation. Oh, before I do that, I should go to, well, we've already voted, right? That's what I thought. I think we need to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire. Sorry about that. That just seemed to move so quickly there.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And now I'd like to go to staff for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Chinmaya Mission Canada for the lands located at 2156 Highbury Avenue North. So the subject site is located in Northeast London on Highbury Avenue North, just outside the urban growth boundary. It's located on the east side of Highbury and is approximately 2.02 hectares in area with just over 135 meters in frontage on Highbury. There's a small creek that runs north-south through the site, and surrounding land uses are agricultural to the north and east and low-density residential to the west and south. So there's quite a bit of history with this site. Since being annexed by the City of London in 1993, there have been a number of planning applications submitted. In 2003, there was a request from the previous owner to redesignate the lands to multifamily medium-density residential and to rezone to a residential R1 special provision, a residential R7, a restricted office, and neighborhood facilities zones. That application was refused. And in 2004, the applicant resubmitted with a request to add a special policy to permit severances for non-farm dwellings and to rezone the lands to an R1 special provision zone to permit single detached dwellings. That application was subsequently approved. And the following year in 2005, consent and minor variance applications were submitted requesting to create lots for single detached dwellings. That application was approved, however, the conditions were never fulfilled and the approval lapsed. In 2016, most recently, a technical amendment was made, initiated by the city to reinstate the land use permissions, which were inadvertently deleted through the Comprehensive Annexed Area Zoning Bylaw Amendment. So now the applicant, the new owner, is requesting to convert the existing residential building on site to a place of worship and accordingly has submitted an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application. You can see the existing building there, and then to the south is proposed parking to support the proposed place of worship. So a couple photos of the property here. The first is looking north on Highbury of the existing building, and the second is looking south on Highbury of the area where the proposed parking lot would be located. So for policy, the site is located within the farmland and green space place types of the London Plan, and there's an existing specific policy area which applies, which permits a severance to create 3 residential lots for non-farm dwellings. Similarly, the site is designated agricultural, open space, and environmental review with a special policy in the 1989 official plan, which permits a severance to create 3 residential lots for non-farm dwellings. And finally, the current zoning of the site is an R1 special provision, an open space 4, and an environmental review zone. The special provision, which applies to the R1 zone, allows for 3 single detached dwellings. So the requested amendment, the initial request requested to amend the existing specific policies in both the 1989 official plan and the London Plan to permit the proposed place of worship use. In addition, a zoning bylaw amendment was requested to rezone the front portion of the site containing the existing building to a neighborhood facility special provision zone, neighborhood facility special provision. So that's H18 NF2 special provision. And the requested special provisions were to permit parking in the front yard, a reduced rear yard setback of 10 meters, and reduced interior side yard setback of 11 meters. Through the review of the application, staff had concerns with the request to only rezone the front portion of the site, as if the rear portion was left the existing residential R1 zone and the requested official plan amendments were permitted, then that portion of the site would no longer be in conformity with the official plan. The applicant subsequently amended their application to request a holding neighborhood facility special provision in the front with the H18 and to carry forward the previously requested special provision to permit parking in the front yard and to rezone the back portion of the site to an agricultural special provision AG1 zone. The special provisions requested are technical amendments to permit reductions in lot area and lot frontage as a result of the creation of the zone boundary and staff are recommending to prohibit farm dwellings as a result of that creation of the zone boundary as well. The other special provisions for setbacks were no longer required because of the change in request from NF2 to NF. So the provincial policy statement gives planning authorities the ability to permit non-agricultural uses in prime agricultural areas, and limited non-residential uses may be permitted subject to specific criteria. Staff is satisfied that the request is consistent with the PPS and conforms to these criteria. The farmland and green space place types in the London Plan allow for a range of agricultural and open space uses, and also has policies allowing for limited non-agricultural uses where consistent with the PPS. Through the use of a specific policy, the requested amendment would not prohibit any of the uses currently permitted in the farmland or green space place types, but rather would expand the range of currently permitted uses to allow a place of worship, but remove the existing permissions allowing for non-farm dwellings. It should be noted that the policies in the farmland and green space place types are for the most part not under appeal, however the maps are, and so these policies are informative but not determinative. And staff is satisfied that the request is in conformity with the London Plan. The agricultural and open space designations in the official plan, the 1989 official plan rather, permit a range of farming types and open space uses. And Chapter 10 provides council the ability to implement policies for specific areas, allowing a change in land use that is site-specific and located in an area where council wishes to maintain existing land use designations, but allow for a specific use. So similar to the London Plan, the requested amendment would amend the existing Chapter 10 policy, replacing the existing residential permissions with a new site-specific policy permitting a place of worship, but still allow the currently permitted uses in the agricultural and open space designations. So staff is satisfied the request is in conformity with the 1989 official plan. The site has been identified as having archaeological potential, and therefore it's recommended the H18 holding provision be applied to the lands, which would require an archaeological assessment to be undertaken and accepted prior to any development. So all in all, staff is satisfied that the request is consistent with the policies of the PPS and is in conformity with the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. The request will facilitate the adaptive reuse of an existing residential building with a new use that is compatible with the surrounding agricultural area. Lastly, the request will replace the existing urban residential uses currently permitted on the subject lands and reintroduce agricultural uses. As such, the requested amendment is more consistent with the PPS than the existing residential permissions, and accordingly, it's recommended that the requested amendments be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'd like to go to the applicant.
Testing, does this work?
Yes,
Okay.
I can hear you. Mr.
Okay, Madam Chair
Kirkness.
and committee members, my name is Laverne Kirkness of Kirkness Consulting, acting for Chimnaya Mission. And most of the people behind me and beside me, in fact, maybe they want to just put up their hands to show you, there's probably about 25 of them. And there's about 100 folks that meet at Jack Chambers School every Sunday. And it is, instead of meeting there, they would like to have their own place. And therefore, they purchased this property, hoping that they could get it redesignated, replace typed, and rezoned to permit the conversion of the residents to a place of worship. So I have two members of the steering committee. I just wish I would like to introduce Vasu and Vinod, if they would just hold their hands up and so the committee knows them. The rest are members of the congregation. This is a complicated property. It's got a long history, as you can tell by the agenda, and we appreciate being able to work with Michael Thomas Insink and Catherine Lowry to come to an agreeable position with Chimnaya such that we support the report and recommendation that they put before you. And we thank them for working with us in that regard. The policy framework is extremely complicated. The property is quite complicated, as you can see, with the stream going through it, 4 zones on it. So we think, though, that our focus is to really create the development along the front with a refurbished conversion, slightly larger parking area. The rest will basically remain the same. And we do have to go through site plan approval as well, so that those refinements certainly the city will see. So unless there's any questions from the public, we would ask the committee to simply take this report and recommendation and take it to council for adoption. Hopefully you will do that. And thank you.
Thank you. And are there any technical questions of the applicant? I see none, and I'd like to go to the gallery here, starting on my left. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this application? And I'll just go around. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this application? And over here, if there's anyone that would like to speak to this application, please come to the microphone. You can approach the microphone and you're able to speak for 5 minutes. Just state your name and address, if you will.
Good afternoon. My name is Ekaterina. I've been a member of Chinmaya Mission for over 5 years now, and I can say that they do a great job for the community. They involve children, youth, and help people with self-development. So by having their own property and their own congregation, they will be able to bring more to the city and create a greater community. And they incorporate everybody. They're very inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one last time, if there's anyone else that would like to speak. I see none. I need a motion to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Squires seconding.
Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And I'd like to go to the committee. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank staff for the report. Thanks to the community as well for coming out. It's good to see this recommendation from staff. I remember, again, another nuance and change to the Planning Act puts a moratorium in place from official plan amendments without council permission for a 2-year period after the adoption of a new official plan. So that's what this community ran into a few months ago and had to come to this committee and ask that this committee and council direct staff to process the application rather than wait for the moratorium to expire, which would have happened this month, I believe. So it's really good to see the application here now instead of making the community wait for the application to just begin getting processed right now. So thank you to the community for being pretty tenacious in seeing this come forward. I think it's a really good use of the land, which is why I voted, and I voted in favor of allowing the application to be processed way back when, I think it was in the summer. So I just think I know there were some concerns because this was taking place outside the urban growth boundary, but as Ms. Lowry said, it's like the lowest impact possible on this piece of land. It's also better, we're reverting a piece of it back to agricultural use. We're undoing a mistake that I think was made in a previous council back in 2003, which was allowing residential development on this site when there weren't any city services like sanitary and stormwater services to this site. So I think that was a mistake of a previous council, and it allows us to undo that. And I like the H18, since there could be archaeological assets on this land. So this allows, this prevents any kind of development taking place until we ensure that all of those things are looked after first. And the repurposing of an existing building is always a good thing as well. So again, thanks to staff for the report. I'm very happy to move the motion to accept the staff recommendation, and I'm happy to see this go through council next week as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I'll second the motion. I want to say, when we approved it to go forward as an application, I was a bit skeptical that this was going to be supportable. I mean, it sounds like a great organization, but on the land use issues, I was not sure about this kind of change happening outside the urban growth boundary. And I think it goes to show that allowing the application to go forward, getting actual advice from our planning staff on the issue is really helpful. I mean, it's not lost on me either that we're creating a remnant parcel of like 0.6 hectares. We just talked about a different property where we're trying to maintain larger parcels of agricultural land. But I think in this particular situation, we're starting with a very small parcel to begin with. We're taking something that is zoned residential and turning it into neighborhood facility and agricultural zoning. So I support it because I think that's the most appropriate land use, and especially given the overall intention of the provincial policy statement to try and encourage the protection of prime agricultural land. There's adjacent agricultural lands that conceivably it could be combined with them in the future. Even those lands are not really big enough. I was looking on the map, and they're especially constrained by all the quarry work that's going around, the aggregate extraction that's happening in that area. But in the long-term future, that could all be back to agriculturally. And if we protect the lands, that is more likely than not. So I'll support it. I thought at the time that the application came forward to go ahead that it was a very long shot that this would make a lot of sense, but it's clear that it does, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. And any other comments? Councillor Squire.
I just want to recognize that once again, we're seeing a faith community step forward in the City of London and do some really good things, including using a piece of land. But when I heard the statement about being inclusive, being part of the community, I hear that sort of uniformly in the City of London. And I met with I was talking to a bishop the other day, and they were saying that they often think faith communities are apt to exclude people. And I have to say, I've always found the opposite to be true, that faith communities are generally inclusive. So other than the fact that you didn't locate in wonderful Ward 6, I'll go ahead and support this.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. And if I may, the committee, I'll just make a quick comment. I did not support this when this came forward. It was outside the urban growth boundary, and I have concerns. I have a ward that is full of lines that are outside the urban growth boundary and how we develop out. I'm always very cautious, but I want to thank the applicant and staff for coming together and doing the work. When I hear things that are more consistent with our provincial policy, I think that is something that is good for our city. And when I see residential moving over to agricultural, again, the protection of our farmland is it just makes it better. So I am going to be supporting this application, and I want to thank the community for the work that you do. And so with that, I know we have a motion, Councillor Cassidy and Deputy Mayor Helmer, and if we can go and vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And thank you for everyone for coming out. Moving on to items for direction, we have 4.1, a letter from Councillor Lewis regarding the Argyle Business Improvement Association. Not sure if the committee would just like to receive the letter. I did speak with Councillor Lewis, who said he wanted to update the committee as to the association and where it's moving forward with its hiring. So I need a motion to receive. Councillor Cassidy, and again, second by Councillor Squire. And if we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And deferred matters, additional business, I see none. And confidential, if I can have a motion to go in camera for 6.1 and 2 listed on the agenda. Councillor Cassidy. And I need a seconder. Deputy Mayor Helmer. And if we can vote. And will we be coming back? No, so I think we'll be adjourning from the committee room.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And again, we'll be going into confidential and we'll be adjourning from the committee room. Thank you.